So, hello, my name is Alex Pellegrini, and I am the Farmland Raptor Program Coordinator for Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. And as I was putting this talk together, I truly made a bit of a game time decision. It's short-eared owl season. The short-eared owls are what's on my mind right now, and that's the field work that I'm in. So instead of bouncing between these species and projects, which just felt impossible with how passionate and the rabbit holes that I go down when I'm putting these things together, I decided that instead of bouncing, instead of having this ping pong ball talk, we're going to go deep. We're going to go really deep on one of our birds here, and that is the short-eared owl. So trust me, it's going to be more fun this way. Soak it in right here because this picture is your taste of barn owls for the evening. Um, but we're going to focus on the methods and insights from the short-eared owl research that we're doing here at the Farmland Raptor Program in Maryland. And we're going to go a bit beyond as well. We're going to go down the rabbit holes, as I said. I'm going to tell you what we're learning, how we're studying them, why this work matters, and why this species really refuses to make anything easy for us. But before we get into owls themselves, I like to introduce myself a little bit uh, because I haven't been a lifelong bird person. And there was a point in my life where I truly had no idea what I wanted to do. And I could at that point probably identify a northern cardinal, and that was about it. But I was preparing to go to college, and I knew three things at this point. One, I didn't want to work indoors. Two, I was not built to sit at a desk all day with my ADHD brain. And three, I really liked watching David Attenborough. So, logically, and what made sense, the solution for me seemed to be biology. It seemed to be a good way to get outside and do something in nature. And I was at Towson University, pursuing this biology and actually animal behavior degree. And I was about to graduate, and I had one semester left when I watched this movie called The Big Year. And I had no idea that people like this existed, traveling around the country and chasing birds, keeping these meticulous lists. And I was a Pokemon kid, a really big Pokemon kid. So, of course, birding, it feels like the real world version of Pokemon. And I went out and I gave it a shot. And it's really, truly snowballed into this full blown obsession. And I'm all in on this avian journey. And accompanying me and mentoring me on this avian journey is Andy Brown right here, the manager of the Farmland Raptor program. And together with the help of so many incredible, truly incredible volunteers who make this program possible, we run the Farmland Raptor program. But this program, it didn't appear out of nowhere. So the backstory here is that in 2000, the federal government initiated the state and tribal wildlife grants program. And then in 2005, it became mandatory for each state to submit a state wildlife action plan in order to receive funding. These plans identify species of greatest conservation need in each state. And when Maryland revised its state wildlife action plan in 2015, a significant number of bird species were identified and their conservation priorities. And that momentum, it leads to the creation of Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, which is a 501c3 nonprofit to focus on connecting birds and habitats and people to create these conditions for birds to flourish in Maryland. And because several of those species of greatest conservation need were farmland raptors, the Farmland Raptor program was created. And today we focus on four farmland raptor species. So we have the American barn owl, the American kestrel, the northern harrier, and the short-eared owl. And tonight we're going to focus on just one, as I already said, the short-eared owl, Osseo flammeus. And Osseo is this classical Latin name referring to a horned or eared owl, and flammeus means flame-colored or fiery. So the short-eared owl, you get the flame-colored eared owl. But before we really get into short-eared owls, I want to start from the beginning. And for me, the beginning is, before the short-eared owl had a name, before humans even came into the picture. or at least before anything we'd recognize as a modern human, because we're going back, 2.5 to 3 million years. And just to anchor that time scale, this sits right between when our ancestors looked something like this over here and this. Um, in that same window, in the late Pliocene, roughly 3 million years ago, in what's now Poland and elsewhere in Europe, we get fossils assigned to Osteophomeus, or to very closely related forms within the Osteo lineage. And to highlight one of my personal ancient favorites from that lineage, if we jump ahead to the late Pleistocene in the Andes of Ecuador, we meet Osteo ecuadoriensis. So this was a big owl, probably stood over 2 feet tall with a wingspan over 5 feet. It had these powerful legs to lift it up and jump from the ground because these were, grassland birds even back then. And pellets found alongside its bones include the remains of small mammals and actually other owls as well. So it appears to have been, and it has been described as a cannibal owl. And just like their modern relatives, these ancient Osteo owls hunted the open country. They didn't act like normal owls, right? They broke the mold of these typical nocturnal, tree-dwelling, stereotypical owls. But for a long time, none of this really matters. Because to people, owls are just owls. They show up in myth, they show up in folklore and ancient art, but we don't really get the first clear written mention of an Osteo owl until this guy right here, in 77 AD, when Pliny the Elder used the term Osteo in his Natural History. And he writes, this is roughly translated to, the Osteo is a nocturnal bird of the owl kind, with ears terrifying in its screech and unlucky to be aboard. And now, whether that's actually a short-eared owl or even what we consider an Osteo today, I don't think so. It's highly debatable. But it's the first time that we see the name Osteo in writing, and that really marks a major milestone. So then jumping ahead here to the mid-1700s, the age of enlightenment, or what I like to call the taxonomic free-for-all, naturalists, they start racing to name everything that moves. And let me introduce you to this guy right here. And I've tried time and time again to pronounce his name, and I'm not quite sure that I'm doing it right. So we're just going to call him Eric P. And Eric P. Was the first to publish a formal scientific description of short-eared owl in his Danske Atlas. These are the volumes right here in 1769. And he called it Strix Flammea, which, fine. But the problem is this guy right here, who you might recognize, Linnaeus, he had already taken that name for the barn owl back in 1758. So right out the gate, we're getting a name collision, and this mess begins, and the name game kicks off. So jumping ahead, 1771, Peter Simon Pallas comes along and names it Strix accipitrina, which was later revised to Osteo accipitrinus. Which, to be fair, it's kind of a cool name. It roughly means hawk-like owl, which is probably, it's a nod to how it floats low over the open ground if you've ever seen a short-eared owl hunt, like a harrier almost, if you've seen a harrier hunt. And eventually, we settle on this Osteo flammeus. So we're recycling that original flammeus from our guy Eric P., but we're pairing it with Osteo, which is that ancient Roman word used by Pliny the Elder back in 77 AD. But through the late 1700s, 1800s, this owl, the short-eared owl, it's this taxonomic ping pong ball, at least Latin name-wise, because we get Strix brachiotis and Otis microcephalus and Brachiotis palustris, and my favorite, Strix otis minor, because that really just means junior long-eared owl. And then, following these guys that I've mentioned, something different starts to happen, and the shotguns come out. This is the golden age of natural history. Colonial specimen collecting is on overdrive. We have shotgun ornithology in full effect. So, these guys are bagging and tagging anything that flaps or moves. And if it looks slightly different, what's happening is boom, that thing that looks different is getting a Latin name of its own. And by the late 1800s, Osteophlemaeus has accumulated this whole train of aliases. Some were proposed as species, some as subspecies, some are just alternate genus placements, but they all are reflecting the same thing. That people are naming birds wherever they found them, often based on small regional differences. And was it justified? Sometimes, but mostly it's just pretty messy. Creates this whole mess. And then, interestingly, this naming boom slows down. And what follows it is what I like to call the age of quiet lumping. And in 1940, this is all leading up to this history. Because in 1940, ornithologist James L. Peters, right here, he publishes this volume 4 of his checklist of birds of the world. And in it, he just merges everything, all the short-eared owl names, all the regional species, they just collapse. James L. Peters collapses them into this one Osteophlemaeus. And there's no major study that he does. The scientific world is very different. There's just a checklist. And to be fair, right, a lot of those earlier splits, they're based on these very thin differences. So, slight color differences, small size shifts between the birds. And, just generally what's happening is these explorers are excited about finding and naming something new. But overnight, thanks to this checklist, short-eared owls around the world, they become this single species. And that range map looks like this. So today, Osteophlemaeus, our short-eared owl, is considered this cosmopolitan species. It's one of the most widely distributed owls on Earth, but it doesn't show up evenly, right? It's distributed, around the world, but its distribution is patchy, and they're closely tied to these open habitats. They're closely tied to prey availability. This all makes sense. And currently, there are 10 recognized subspecies. So that subspecies distribution looks like this. And this is crude and a bit blocky, but it's meant to be that way. Because if anything that I've told you up to this point tells you anything, I hope the message is that I don't entirely buy this. And to me, those 10 subspecies, they're still carrying the fingerprints of that early naming boom. So even though James L. Peters lumped everything, the fingerprints of the golden age of discovery and naming are still existing. And me not entirely buying this, it's just a hypothesis for now, but we're working on it. We're revisiting short-eared owl taxonomy. It's overdue. And one very obtainable place to start is in the museums with museum specimens. And this is a collaborative project. It's led by Dr. Marie-Sophie Garcia-Arras out of the University of Illinois, who is also heading up the short-eared owl working group, which we'll get into later a little bit here. But most importantly, it's built on a project, built on the foundation laid by David Johnson, he's not just a mentor to Sophie and Andy, who I showed you a picture of, and me, but really owl researchers all over the world. I remember we were at the World Owl Conference in 2023, and room full of owl people, and there was a point where they were honoring him in a sense, and they asked everyone to, they just asked the crowd, raise your hand if David Johnson has impacted your work. And just looking around and seeing that 90% of that room or more was raising their hand was absolutely incredible. But here he is in the bottom left here in that green bordered photo with Sophie and I at the Smithsonian's Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. And so far, we've visited 6 collections. So not just in North America, but also in the UK and Scotland and Spain. And I actually just got back from LSU's collection not even a week ago on Friday evening. It was really Saturday morning because I didn't pull into my house until around 1 a.m. on Saturday. So this project, it's built directly off David's protocol. It was originally developed for his work on burrowing owls and then later adapted for barn owls, which Andy has done a lot of work with. that barn owl morphometrics aspect. And it's this measuring-based approach, this morphometrics-based approach. It's designed to bring this real measurable evidence to bear on these taxonomic questions. My hypotheses about how I don't buy it, and to support these possible splits where it's warranted. So far you can see we've measured approximately 1,000 specimens representing 9 of the 10 subspecies of short-eared owls around the world. And here you can see some of those preliminary results. So we've only had the chance to analyze a fraction of the total data set, but even so, we're already seeing some intriguing patterns. So this is just female short-eared owls here. And you can see that the Galapagoensis, so the Galapagos subspecies here, it clearly clusters out from the nominate Flammeus. So what I mean by that is the Flammeus are the birds that you would be familiar with when you go out to see short-eared owls around here. And the Galapagos birds, they're an absolutely fascinating case. So not just morphometrically, but behaviorally and phenotypically as well. And just to give you a look at this, if we take a look at the Galapagos birds on the left here compared to the birds that you're familiar with, so those nominate Flammeus birds on the right, you can immediately see how much darker these Galapagos birds are. And for me, that instantly reminds me of Glauber's rule. So if you aren't familiar with Glauber's rule, it's the idea that these endotherms, so these especially birds in these warm, humid environments, they tend to have this darker plumage. And why is that? Well, the current thinking is that this pigment, it provides protection against feather degrading bacteria, which thrive in those wetter, more humid conditions. So that pigment is protection. So when we see those richer beige tones in Galapagoensis, it really makes you wonder, is this Glauber's rule in action? And I think so. Now, when we look closely at these underparts here as well, there's something really special about them. They show these like transverse bars here, and actually just for the first time the other night, I saw these transverse bars on some of our birds around here. But this is a really unique feature, especially the markings being this strong like here. They just look like long-eared owls. And I'll show you in a sec a comparison photo. But every time I see it, my brain just lights up. It's a really cool, nerdy detail that I like to notice. And to show you that compared to a long-eared owl, and throw in a fun fact here, there is even a recorded case of suspected hybridization between short-eared owls and long-eared owls. And you can see the transverse barring here on that long-eared owl. And then this bird in the middle here is the suspected hybrid. But anyway, to circle back to the Galapagos short-eared owl that sent me on this little side fact tangent here. There's a team working in the Galapagos with the short-eared owls that we're collaborating with, and they're doing incredible work. They know far more about them than I do, but behaviorally, I just want to highlight something that I find so cool, and I think you guys will find so cool too, because these Galapagos short-eared owls, if you're familiar with what our northern birds up here are hunting, they're hunting voles, right? Mostly voles and these things in the grasses. But these Galapagos short-eared owls, they're hunting storm petrels, wedge rump storm petrels. And I'll show you a video here. And bear with me, this video didn't work in our practice run, but I think I fixed it in the 10 minutes I had. So let's give it a shot. Ahead, because of course it didn't play where I wanted it to. You can see how much darker the Galapagos short-eared owls are here too. That Glauber's rule that I talked about, eating a wedge rump storm petrel. I mean, that behavior where it's chasing them through the air. I just couldn't imagine one of the birds that we see up here doing it. Absolutely fascinating. But anyway, other than the fact that they hunt these short-eared owls, they're clearly morphometrically and behaviorally and phenotypically very different, and there's a lot to be explored there. But something that I find especially exciting with owls, something that is very important when you study owls, and something that I love, something that I really love staying up at night poring through are these vocalizations. So you can go on these audio archives online, and it's still a pretty wide open frontier when it comes to short-eared owls, as far as I can tell. There's been no formal study comparing these vocalizations across their global range, and it's a project I'm really hoping to dive into soon. But I'm going to give you guys a little taste, here and maybe blow your mind a little bit. And it's funny because I was showing my fiance these vocalizations, and she was saying I don't hear a difference at all. But maybe if you're a bird person and you're nerdy about this like me, you can hear the difference. So let's give this a shot. So here on the right, I'll play the bark call of the birds that you're familiar with. So our northern birds, and this recording's from North Dakota. Excuse me, it played the South American birds. So we can do that again. These are the South American birds we'll listen to first. And then here are the northern birds from North Dakota. So that's the short-eared owl you'd be familiar with, and these are the southern ones. It's different. It just is. But now we've really gone down the rabbit hole here, and I've taken you with me. But to bring it back home, how did this whole thing start for Andy and me in Maryland? And well, it all really began and it kicked off in October 2023 when we attended the World Owl Conference in Onalaska, Wisconsin. And that's where we met researchers from around the world who were all asking similar questions about these short-eared owls. And out of that meeting, the International Short-eared Owl Working Group was formed. And this group met again in Costa Rica in 2025 at the Raptor Research Foundation conference. And it was here where we had refined our major objectives for short-eared owls. And we started asking these bigger picture questions. So some of these questions, right? What does population structure look like? And what about taxonomy and phylogeny and genetic variation? And how connected are these migratory populations? Migratory connectivity. How large are these populations really? What is the population size? And how do we develop these meaningful conservation goals for this species? That's the key. Now, we can't do all that alone, and the scope of that is so much larger than Maryland, so much larger than just what the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership is doing. But the point here is that we're working with such a highly nomadic, wide-ranging species. We don't have the capacity to run these large-scale genetic studies in-house at the Farmland Raptor program. But what we can do, and what we do have the unique opportunity to do, is collect this high quality field data and contribute to these global efforts. So we can gather this morphometric data. We can build these age and sex structures. We can examine winter site fidelity. So do they come back and use the same wintering areas? We can contribute to these studies of migratory connectivity, right? Where do our short-eared owls go? And where do they come back to? And all of this feeds into answering these larger conservation questions. But to answer any of these questions, we first had to solve a very, very basic problem. That last one on the list here, because to figure these out, we have to get the birds in hand. We're bird banders, and we have to. And when you start digging into the literature on these effective ways to do that, these effective capture methods for short-eared owls, well, let me give you a taste of what you find. So one of the first papers that pops up when you start searching these capture methods is Booms et al. 2012. And let's just read this title together here, okay? It says, use of a net gun to safely capture short-eared owls in mid-flight from a helicopter. I am not going to do that, obviously. So anyway, we keep reading. And next, we have techniques for locating and capturing nesting female short-eared owls. Well, you'll find out a bit later, but that doesn't really happen in Maryland. We do not have these nesting birds. Really, one nesting record like once every 20 years, approximately. And then when you read deeper into this paper and papers like this paper does a great job of citing some other methods here. But hoping that there's something, and you keep kind of finding this phrase here. Success rate was low. So at this point, it's a hands on the head, like pulling your hair out situation. What are we going to do? And I had a friend here in Maryland, Libby Erickson, and she did her master's work on short-eared owls. And in her master's work, they tried these perch traps. So this is quite the elegant idea. You put this little, what's called a noose carpet, so these little microfilament fishing lines on top of this hardware cloth structure that fits on top of these perches. And if you've gone out to see short-eared owls, you know that they love to perch. But this bird pictured right here, well, that is the only one that she caught during her master's work. So her project had to shift, and instead of the transmitter study that she wanted to do, it became a vegetation structure study for her master's for short-eared owls. And, that just speaks to how difficult these guys are to work with. But to Andy and me, we're pulling our hair out, but that just sounds like a challenge. And a challenge that we were really ready to dive into head first. So we tried the perch traps. We built them, the same concept that Libby used. And you can see here, we knew the owls were using them because there was this whitewash on the perches, right? So you can see the owl poop. Owls poop straight down when they poop, not shoot out the back. And we found pellets underneath. So that's our colleague Melissa there with a pellet. Very excited when we're finding this evidence. And we thought, okay, this is it. We're going to get them. They're using these perches. They're acclimating to them. We had been leaving these out. So we've been introducing the perches to the landscape in September so that they could acclimate to them and use them. And the first 2 seasons, nothing. So this 3rd season, we try something new, and we try to make these dummy little structures. So if you can see here, back to this slide, you can see that there's these little structures that we add to the top. But we figured that, instead of introducing this foreign object into their environment, onto these perches, we better make these fake attachments, these dummy setups, to let the owls get used to the structures before we just go out there. And on Facebook groups, we can see that photographers are posting images of these short-eared owls using our perches. So we had proof that they were using them, more so than the whitewash and the pellets, but still, nothing. So we also were trying these balusha tree traps, and this is a very popular trap design used by raptor banders around the world. And it's essentially a small hardware cloth cage containing a live lure. In our case, we used invasive species like this starling here. We also used meadow voles as well. And these traps, they actually originated in East India. And the Hindi translation is often described as hair umbrella, which refers to the horsehair nooses they used to use instead of those microfilament fishing lines. They were anchored to this frame of hardware cloth. And you might notice something in this photo. You might be distracted while I'm telling you about the Hindi translation. There's a lot of people, when I'm in person, I catch them staring at these Doritos here. And, this comes from this advice that we got from David Johnson, which, I talked about earlier, one of our big mentors. And he told us if we wanted to use these balusha trees overnight, we needed some food for these guys. And through the countless things that he's discovered and researched with owls, it just so happens that he feels that he has also found that Doritos are the best thing you can put in there to withstand the urine and feces and still maintain their crunch throughout the night, so that as the voles move around, they will crunch the Doritos under their feet. And he also suggested getting a bottle of Coca-Cola and taking the cap off and just pouring a little Coca-Cola in there and giving it to the vole so that they can stay caffeinated throughout the night and run around the trap so they can move a lot. And while we didn't do this, I didn't feel right giving a little Coca-Cola to our voles here. But still, even with the Doritos, nothing. We also use these Swedish goshawk traps. And there was some evidence from a collaborator at SeaTac over in Seattle, the airport, with USD APHIS, who was using these to capture short-eared owls at airports. But the key advantage that he had was that he could leave these traps out 24/7. These traps, they became part of the landscape. So they weren't just novel, they weren't suspicious or anything like that. They were just there. They were part of the landscape. And the setup is similar to the balustrade. So you use a starling or something. In this bottom part here, there is a hardware cloth cage usually. And so there's a live lure. And then the idea is that these doors would be open, the owls would come, drop in, and the doors close overhead. And the only thing that happened the whole time that we used these is this red-tailed hawk that just perched on it and taunted us and flew away after 20 minutes. We keep going. We'd move to these traditional methods per advice that we got from researchers in Belgium, in the UK, all over the world. Mist nets. So they're these reliable, standard, tried and true bird banding devices, essentially. These nets that you cannot see very well, as you can see in this photo here. But we learned very quickly, setting them up during the day is a big no-no. The owls could see them, they would hunt around them, they'd hunt over them, they'd completely avoid them. They had time to acclimate to them. We set them up in the crepuscular hours as well, and the same thing. They can see them too well. So we moved to the night when it's dark out. We went even darker, and we started setting these nets up in situations where, the sun had fully set. There was no glow on the horizon. But in this situation, it was a very bright night with the moon. And of course, we should have known the moon phase matters, the wind matters, anything that can help the owl see the net matters. And this video that I'll show now is very cool. It's a thermal video. So I have this thermal monocular right here. And we can use it to see the short-eared owls. And actually now we use it to check our nets as well. But you can see in this video, this is the short-eared owl. And then over here, you can see the net poles. And it's flying around our nets. But since the moon is so bright, which you can't tell just from this thermal video here, but the short-eared owl is completely avoiding the nets. It's curious about what's going on. It's curious about our audio lore, which I'll introduce and talk about in a second. But it is not, we're not tricking it here. We're not getting it to go in our nets. So the audio lore that I promised I would mention. In combination with the mist nets, what we use is these series of sounds and placed right underneath the mist net. So we use these male hoots, these bark calls, and these vole squeaks. And I'll play them one by one. So first, you'll hear the bark calls. Oh, sorry. First, you'll hear the male hoots. Okay. And then you'll hear the bark calls right here. And then you will hear vole squeaks. So from, Microtus pennsylvanicus. Favorite food. And, essentially what I was doing here is I was sitting, in my bed late at night, making these short-eared owl mixtapes to place on the speakers that we would put below the nets. And I'm mixing and matching calls, changing sequences. We're adjusting the volume in the field, and we're trying everything. We've been out so many times trying everything. And this brings me to a funny story with these audio calls, with these audio lures. So we have many sites across the state, but we're working with one of our local land managers, let's call him. And this guy, he has a lot of experience bird banding. And from the beginning, he kept telling us, your audio lures, they're not good. They're not going to work. So, okay, we're trying here. Give me a break, I'm making new ones. We're adjusting things, changing it up. But by this point, we're 2 seasons in when this story comes in. And we've been to the same site over and over again. We've caught nothing. Every hour, the way that our mist net checks work is every hour we go to the nets, we drive up in a car, we check them, they're always empty, and we drive back. But we're hoping they're not empty. And this particular night, he was really complaining and telling us, it's the audio lures, it's the audio lures. So we go out and we check the nets, and he's just, the way that we went is we're in 2 different cars. So we drive up in 2 different cars and we head out to check. And he'd been telling us, he'd been saying, what you need to do is you need to let me go and lay underneath the net, and I'll suck on my fingers and I'll squeak like a vole. And Andy and I, every time we'd say, absolutely not. You're not doing that. So we're in two different cars and we go to check the nets. And we get out of the car, and this land manager, he doesn't drive, so he was in the other car, and Andy and I get out of the car after checking the empty nets, and we look at the other car, and this land manager is nowhere to be found. And we look at the driver, and we were saying, where is he? And the driver's just shaking his head, trying not to laugh. And he says, he wouldn't come with me. I couldn't get him. When you guys started to pull away, he snuck over to the net. He took his old army blanket and he crawled underneath there and he said, "Don't come back for an hour. I'm squeaking like a bull under here." So he's laying underneath the net. And mind you, it is 12 degrees outside. It is an absolutely brutal night. This man, he's not my age. He could be my grandfather, but he's a tough guy. So we left him there, per his wishes. And an hour later, we drive back up to check the nets, and wouldn't you know it, we caught our first short-eared owl. And to be fair, he still swears it was him, but he'll tell you to this day that it was his vole impression. And I say this respectfully, but I am of the opinion that it was, in fact, our audio lore. Because even though he was underneath the net, the owl was actually two nets down directly over one of my speakers, directly over one of the audio lures. But regardless, that night it broke the ice. And since then, we've banded 9 short-eared owls in Maryland here. So here you can see some of our sites and the number of captors and bands we put on at each of them there. But how are we actually taking advantage of having these birds in hand? I gave you a little taste with the short-eared owl working group goals. Complementary to the museum work that we're doing, we're also collecting these morphometrics, so these measurements of different parts of the birds, but on live birds, right, with the birds that we're banding. So we're taking wing chord and tail length and tarsus, all these pretty standard things for birds. But we're taking hallux length, so the length of the thumb talon, primary shortfalls, which is the difference between the tips of the feathers, all these, funny things that us bird people obsess over. We're doing these wing tracings. We can calculate wing surface area and this wing area unloading, which is all really useful for assessing this regional distinctiveness. And something that we're implementing this year that's really special to me is we're doing this standardized photography protocol. And the reason for that is because aging short-eared owls is hard. So to build these age structures of populations, to answer these demographic questions, we have to figure this out. And despite some resources trying to, say that you can age short-eared owls in this way, and they have this type of feather replacement, and you can use that to age short-eared owls, it doesn't really seem to hold up for the birds that we're seeing in hand. And we've tried blacklighting these birds as well. So if you're familiar with that technique, it works well with a lot of other owls. So under a black light, you can see pink fluoresce in the feathers from porphyrins. And these are pigments that fade with age in the sun. And because short-eared owls, they spend a lot of time in exposed sunlight, right on the ground is where they roost most of the time. Those porphyrins, they break down fast. So most of the time, we're not seeing any at all. And if we do, we see them throughout the whole wing, which means that all the feathers are the same age. So what this does right here, what this photography does, is it gives us this consistent data set, this consistent visual data set, where I can build a photo catalog and we can refer back to it. But beyond, these deeper investigations, I'm trying to give you all a taste of. As Andy and I touched, as I touched on, we're banding birds, Andy and I. And here's the thing. Before we started this project, short-eared owls were virtually getting no attention in the state or in the region overall. And, to evidence that, the only short-eared owl banded in the state was in 1975. So you can see that right here. So when we banded our first bird last year, 2 year, I guess 2024, now that it's 2026, but it had been half a century, essentially. 50 years of nothing, no short-eared owl data. I mean, even outside of banding, really, there's no attention to them in the state. But coincidentally, right before this project was even a thought in Andy or I's mind, in April 2023, out on Poplar Island, which is out in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, if you're familiar with it, some U.S. Fish and Wildlife staff, they were walking through the grasses to check an osprey nest, actually, and they flushed a female short-eared owl up out of the grass in April. And subsequently, they discovered the first nest of a short-eared owl in decades in the state. And by sheer luck, one of our colleagues, Melissa, actually, who I showed with the pellet all excited earlier, was out on the island that same day. She was there to band barn owl chicks, and she just happened to have the right size band for short-eared owls. And she ended up banding the second, third, fourth, and fifth short-eared owls ever banded in the state, all chicks. These cute little guys right here. Well, I've not gotten the cuteness reaction from everybody. Some people feel differently. The face only a mother can love right there. But one of those birds was re-encountered in January 2025 when it was lethally removed. So it was shot as a flight safety risk at Reagan National Airport over here in DC, just 35 miles west of where it hatched. And the fact that they shot this bird and they had to lethally remove it when it's an endangered species in Maryland just shows you how they had to resort to these methods because of how difficult these birds are to capture. So the methods that we're building and we're trying to standardize for being able to get these birds in hand, and then airports could subsequently relocate them. The implications of that will span far beyond the projects that we're just working on. But this is very strange. A year and a half later, a bird is only 35 miles to the west, especially for a bird like the short-eared owl, which is so highly nomadic. And I'll show you a little bit of that in a second here. And it's not well documented in the literature, but some ideas, some projects I'd really like to do that are in my mind is kind of investigate this a bit. Because given that the mid-Atlantic, where we are, it's within their traditional wintering range and not really their breeding range traditionally. It's a temperate climate, right? We have a relatively stable food source throughout the year. So a few of us in Maryland, including myself, were really interested in this idea that maybe there's some residency a bit occurring. If there's food here, why would the birds move? But anyway, these questions could be answered with things like telemetry, so transmitters and trackers on these birds' backs. And here you're seeing a figure from the only published study on short-eared owl transmitter work in the entire United States. And this was a study out of Alaska here. And you can just see how highly migratory these birds are, going from Alaska all the way down into Mexico, into Texas, and things like that. Just absolutely incredible. And there's been a small pilot study in New York. There's a small scale effort underway in Maine. But virtually there's none of this transmitter work that's going on at all. So for a highly nomadic species like the short-eared owl, this kind of data is absolutely vital. It's going to give us that year-round picture so that we can understand these birds throughout their full annual cycle and protect the habitats that matter most to them. We at Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, our Farmland Raptor program, we operate with the understanding that these effective conservation techniques and strategies, they have to be collaborative. They have to be cross-regional and informed by this real movement data that we're working towards. Because, right, a short-eared owl in Maryland one year, maybe in a different state the next year, they're so highly nomadic. But I want to circle back here. We've talked about mating, we've touched on breeding, and some of the mating behaviors of short-eared owls are just way too cool not to mention. The short-eared owl male courtship display is just one of the things that never stops blowing my mind. And honestly, it wouldn't be a proper short-eared owl talk if I didn't bring it up. So what the males do is they fly high, way in the sky, like very, very high in the sky. And they go up in the sky and they let out this series of hoots. So those hoots I played for you before, and I'll play them here in just a second again. And then what they do is they hoot They do those hoots, and then they go into this dive. And in this dive, they bring their wings underneath their body and they clap them really, really quickly. So listen, first you'll hear the hoots, and then a few seconds later, you'll hear the claps here. Claps are coming. Pretty cool. And so that's an audio clip of what's happening here. And I had to add that in because I want to do a video here. But in this video, you can't hear the hoots or the claps too well. But watch, it'll play 3 different times. So it's going to go into a dive. There's the claps, and then you can see how quickly the claps happen in this full speed. Absolutely incredible. Now, I've never personally observed this behavior in Maryland, but obviously it has occurred as the birds bred on Poplar Island in 2023. They've subsequently been seen this past year, 2025, throughout the summer. No nests have been found since 2023, but this year is a picture from a friend of a short-eared owl on Poplar during the breeding season from this past year. And interestingly, this bird was found as roadkill on Poplar Island right here. And to me, this is just a drop dead juvenile bird, no question about it. But it turns out that the juvenile stage of the short-eared owl is really poorly documented, and some of the best experts in the world disagree what it looks like. So what you can see here from my personal photo study, what I'm seeing is that the mask really stands out on juvenile short-eared owls. And some of the documentation in the literature and in the field guides, it really does highlight this mask. I'm just being a careful scientist here, saying that it's poorly documented, it needs to be better documented. But this mask here, this Gene Simmons look, if you will, really is diagnostic for me of those short-eared owls. So that the black kind of like giving that eyeglasses look as well, right over the beak there. But outside of this face pattern, you can see these like very downy feathers right here underneath the thumb there, like the down in your down jackets that keep you warm. Those juvenile birds have it. But just to give you a sense of how underdocumented this juvenile stage is of short-eared owls, if you filter by juvenile on Macaulay Library, so on eBird, you can see that long-eared owl, so their cousins, which are very hard to find in Maryland and elsewhere, have 545 photos. Juveniles of short-eared owls all over the world, more widespread than long-eared owls, 103 photos. Very, very poorly documented. There's a lot more work to be done. I could nerd out about this and talk for hours, but to bring it back home here, why does this work matter? And for the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership and for the Farmland Raptor Program, short-eared owls are a regional priority. They're a species of greatest conservation need in the state. In Maryland, they're listed as an S1 breeder, meaning they're critically imperiled. They're an endangered species in the state. If you zoom out across the Mid-Atlantic, you can see this same pattern, vulnerable, declining, these negatively toned colors. Here's the key right here for these NatureServe maps. Across the whole United States, North America, you can see that this picture doesn't visually look very different, although they are listed as G5 secure nationally. And then globally, they're listed as a species of least concern, according to the IUCN. And that's exactly why this work matters, because when a species is labeled as secure at the global scale, what it does is it masks these urgent local declines. So conservation funding follows perception, and that perception depends on our understanding. So taxonomy isn't just about naming birds. For us birders, it's not just about splitting the species so we can get a new tick on our life list. It's about how do we define these units of conservation. It's about how we recognize these population level threats. It's the basis for protections, for funding, for management plans. So the more clearly that we understand short-eared owls, their structure, their variation, their movements, the better that we can protect them. And for me, the short-eared owl is more than just a study subject. It's a bird that's very, very close to my heart. And, I always end my talks with a reminder, a spin on this old Smokey the Bear poster here. Really only you can help farmland raptors. Um, Short-eared owls are part of one of the most rapidly declining avian groups in North America. They need open spaces, they need healthy prey populations, and better recognition of their conservation needs. And if you were here, if you've ever heard me talk before, you know how much I love Roger Tory Peterson and his wonderful quotes. And this one really hits home for me, especially when it comes to short-eared owls. And that is that the truth of the matter is the birds could very well live without us, but many, perhaps all of us, would find life incomplete, indeed almost intolerable without the birds. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about short-eared owls, talk your ears off. If you would like to get connected, find out more about the Farmland Raptor program outside of just my nerdy 50-minute long tangent about short-eared owls tonight, there's so much that you can get involved in. We need help with nest box monitoring and all kinds of things like that. If you have questions, you can scan the QR code here. It'll take you to our website. My email is right there. Feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk. Always about birds.
Thanks, Alex, so much. This was great. Why don't you unshare? I'll put a spotlight on you. All right, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. Put your questions in the chat box or raise your hand, and I will call on you to ask a question. And I just wanted to say, one, go Tigers. I'm a graduate of Louisiana State University, so I was happy to see that made your presentation today for that. So, any questions? We got Preston. Preston has question number 1. Go ahead, Preston.
It actually wasn't a question, but I wanted to say I've been seeing this really huge short-eared owl in a bamboo forest beside my house, and I've had chickens for close to 2 years now, so I've been noticing it. And coincidentally, when I just got home from a owl pellet dissection thing, I walked out to the yard to go check on the chickens, and I found an owl pellet in my yard.
Wow, and you found a snake, huh? Look at that.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's Pizza. That's the smartest snake in Maryland. Pizza comes to all of the talk.
Very
Except
cool.
for last time, she was shedding.
Oh
and
yeah,
she still is shedding a little bit.
I'm so happy to see you noticing the owls. Truly, yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Hey Preston, what county are you in? Where you saw the short-eared owl?
Baltimore County.
Okay, there you go.
But
all right.
It's really big. Like its wingspan's like my arms.
Very cool.
That's awesome. All right, let me see. I have some questions in here. Earlier on, there was a question, what are the claps for in the mating ritual?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the same as like ruffed grouse drumming and American bitterns booming and vocalizing. It's just the birds have these different like audio mechanisms, whether it be vocally or mechanically through the claps, and sometimes combinations of both, like short-eared owls, to attract their mate. So yeah, it's all to look good for the lady short-eared owls.
Mark wants to know, do you know how many short-eared are in Maryland and the Mid-Atlantic in terms of populations?
Yeah, that's a great question without a straightforward answer. So short-eared owls, they follow. I mean, they're going to be present wherever there's food, right? And voles are not present in the same density every single year. So at sites where there's a lot of voles, and there's an ample amount of food, there's going to be more short-eared owls. I think on Poplar Island, don't quote me on this. It's been a while since I've looked at these surveys, but I believe at one point there were as many as 30 birds there, 30 short-eared owls. And then this year, I'm hearing that they're seeing like just a handful. So it's really it's different between years, and they follow the voles truly.
Follow the voles and you will find the owls. All right. Mural asks, can younger kids 10 and up volunteer with your program?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I truly took the opportunity to nerd out about the one species that we're focusing on today. But the Farmland Raptor program, it's so much more than that. We have a network of almost 300 boxes all over the state. So barn owl boxes and American kestrel boxes. And we're always looking for volunteers to help monitor those boxes. So the way that we do that is just a little camera that I will supply on a long extension pole, and you stick that into the nest box, and then you can record the data in an easy to use app called Nest Watch. And then when we get chicks in the nest, we invite everyone out to come to some banding demonstrations, and it's a really wonderful and rewarding experience. Kids can absolutely be involved, but of course we need people to drive to these sites, so you might end up carting your kids around a little bit.
Is MODIS, is MODIS used for tracking the short-eared owl?
So, given how highly nomadic these birds are, MODIS is very dependent on the MODIS network. So you need these stationary towers that basically can detect the tag within a 10-kilometer, give or take a little bit, dependent on different environmental variables, etc. 10-kilometer radius, and if the bird flies within that zone of the MODIS tower, then it'll ping the MODIS tower, and you can figure out that at least the bird was within range of it. But given that these birds are so nomadic, they go up to the high Arctic to breed on the tundra, where there are really a huge lack of MODIS towers. They can move, across the continent. And then down very far south, so into these areas where MODIS coverage might be sparse. The network has really improved in the east, but it's not great in certain areas, is what I'm getting at. So these GPS, Argos transmitters, using satellite and things like that are kind of the method that we want to use. If we're going to put something on a bird, we want to get the information. We want to make sure that we can get the information we need out of it. So MODIS is something that is not really a popular method for the short-eared owls, especially since they are big enough and they can handle these more these technologies that will give you more in-depth information. So I'm not aware of any project that has used MODIS, no.
Alan is curious, when the young owls are banded, do the bands need to expand? Does the width of their legs not grow?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we are banding the short-eared owls, when we band any bird, we're banding them at the point where their legs are at or close to the full adult size. So with short-eared owls, we're only ever banding adults, so their legs will not grow from that point. And we have these special, we measure the legs, and we're very careful that the band fits and spins around correctly. These bands are essentially weightless. If you're not familiar with bird banding, I didn't really cover it, but it's this aluminum alloy bracelet with a 9-digit number, kind of like your social security number. It's going to be unique to you, and it can be used as an identifier for that individual bird whenever that band is re-encountered. So you can essentially draw these point A to point B movements. The answer is no. Their legs are not going to grow. It's not going to affect them negatively like that. When we band chicks in the nest, like kestrels or barn owls, we're banding them at a certain age where those bands, they can't slip over the feet or anything dangerous like that. Those legs are at full size or very, very close to it.
Kathleen, we'll come back to you before we end. They want to see the last slide to get the links. But Ollie, can I find pellets in Moncton or Hereford? Where can we go pellet hunting? Well, we'll go to Preston's house.
Yeah, there you go. Go to Preston's house. It's really hard to find short-eared owl pellets, especially. Um, it is but maybe if you know where like barred owls or great horned owls are, you kind of got to find a roost with like a lot of whitewash around the trees, and you can go searching for pellets on the ground. But owls, they like to hide, right? They don't really want you to find them, so it's a tricky thing.
That was the only pellet I ever found, ever.
There you go.
Yet you can still find some more, I hope. We got, is there anything possible to do to protect the fields used for them to hunt through DNR, or are there ways to protect fields from developer destruction through legislation?
Yeah, there absolutely are. That is not my area of expertise at all. But I'd be happy. I just put my email down in there to find some resources for you to reach out to folks if that is something that you're very interested in. Put the website down in that chat as well. I think Kathleen asked for it.
Yeah. Apparently, there were 5 spotted this week near Blackwater. Did you know that?
Yeah, so I was just down there at Blackwater. I don't know if she's still here, but I saw Melissa pop in, who I mentioned a couple times, and she was just down there on Wednesday with us, and we banded our 9th bird in the state. One of the most beautiful female short-eared owls I've ever seen. And I talked about those perch methods never working. Well, they finally worked on. Yeah, there's Melissa. Finally worked on Wednesday there. So we were very happy about that.
Awesome. Is your work throughout the state? Is there any work going on in Anne Arundel County, or is it just in Baltimore?
It is not just in Baltimore. It's all over the state. I do live in Baltimore, but there are essentially no short-eared owls in Baltimore. I mean, on Hart Miller Island and at Masonville Cove, there have been some sightings, but those are not some of my study sites. Hope for that in the future. But yeah, we typically work on the Eastern Shore, and then out in Central Maryland are the big spots for us.
Let's see. Alan asked, could the darker plumage of the Galapagos owls help protect them from the sun?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that, melanin has that kind of effect. But the leading theory is that it's more so a result of the feather degrading bacteria.
Maryland has an extensive land preservation program that permanently keeps lands open, and that might be an opportunity for habitat protection.
Yeah, wonderful.
And Alan has added, he had the superb owl, the Super Bowl last weekend, some owl humor thrown into the mix. Now, I had a question, Alex. Why do they have to shoot the owls at the airport?
Yeah, I mean, it's a flight safety risk. So if there are birds on the runway that are in danger of that are putting human lives in danger, they are allowed to lethally control them. And like I said, it really just speaks to how difficult these guys are to work with, and why it's really important that one of the first steps that we're taking is to not only figure this out for ourselves, but for anybody who has to work with short-eared owls across the world. And eventually we'll get that information out there and publish it once it's refined.
They can't just make loud noises and they go away.
They have tried. They sure have tried. And that's the first thing that they try. And I will say that short-eared owls love airports, and I do not hear about them lethally, using these lethal control measures too often. So those loud noises work, but birds are individuals, and sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, well, I don't want to end. I don't want to end on that note. So somebody else is on a on a good note here. One is thank you, Alex, for coming and taking us down the rabbit hole with you on short-eared owls. We'll have to have you back to talk about all the other ones that you're studying.
That's what I was going for.
Yeah, you're invited back. So so this has been wonderful, and thank you for all you're doing. Your team is doing. Melissa, congratulations on the banding. It's so exciting to be on the front end of scientific research here in Maryland, and we get to live vicariously through you, through your research, and hopefully get some volunteers out there to help you with the nest watch and all the good stuff that y'all are doing. So yeah. Science is everybody should be involved. And one of the big things is that Preston was doing is being observant, getting out there and seeing things, because there's only one Alex, but there's all of us out there. So the more that we're out there looking, the better.
That's right. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to put my email and the website one more time in the chat here because it got buried a little last time. But please reach out. Seriously, get involved. I have so much more to tell you about. And yeah, we'll come out and see some, help me with some nest boxes. It'd be wonderful.
Great. And come back on Thursday, where we're going to learn about the overwintering strategies for caterpillars and where we can go find them. So that'll be fun. Caterpillars in winter in 2 acts. Stay well, stay curious, stay outside, and go short-eared owls. Take care, everybody. Good night. All right.